It's important to recognize that the impression that Smith was a believer of an unregulated market economy, that he was allegedly convinced that the market can do no wrong, though very commonly held, is based on an extremely defective understanding of Smith, with very selective and fragmentary reading of his writings. Adam Smith discussed in some detail how an economy may face serious problems because of the excessive search for profits by irresponsible risk-takers, whom he called prodigals and projectors. These are not words of praise, I might explain. And projector is not somebody who has a project, but somebody who makes a project to advance himself at the cost perhaps of the society by taking excessive risk. And the prodigals are similarly defined. That analysis is in fact deeply relevant today in understanding what happened in the financial world. The implicit faith in the wisdom of the market economy, assuming that the market can do no wrong, which is largely responsible for the removal of the established regulations in many countries, particularly in the United States, played a big part in that. The demolition of nearly all legitimate controls of financial markets took place over several decades, since the first moves in that direction under the presidency of Ronald Reagan. The philosophy behind that long march to deregulation was based on assuming away the activities of prodigals and projectors in a way that would have shocked the father of modern economics, since such activities were already quite common in Smith's own time, as he discusses. In fact, the problem has got very much bigger by now. The obligations and responsibilities associated with transactions have in recent years become much harder to trace, to understand, to scrutinize, thanks to the rapid development of secondary markets involving derivatives and other financial instruments. This occurred, as it happens, at a time when plentiful availability of credit, partly driven by huge trading surpluses of some economies, most prominently China, had magnified the availability of easy and cheap credit, and therefore magnified the scale of possible brash operations. And in that atmosphere, with the secondary markets there, a subprime lender who misleads a borrower into taking unwise risk in the form of a mortgage which he or she cannot afford, can now pass off the financial instrument to other parties, remote from the original transaction. Also, since insurance against credit defaults were exempted from state supervision, and this happened in 2000, actually under Clinton administration, it just said that credit default swaps, which are actually insurance, if your credit default, if you don't get your credit back, then it insures against it. All insurance markets have been under supervision from the beginning of capitalism, but in fact by 2000 in America they were exempted, mainly on grounds that the credit default swaps are not to be treated as insurances, but they were exactly an insurance with a different name. So it was happening all this time, and because of all that, it is very difficult to guess how many hundreds of billions of bad insurance were, and I believe still are, making the financial world extremely vulnerable to crisis. And the financial world is very aware of its vulnerability, which is one of the reasons for its reluctance to expand credit, on which everybody rightly complains. The need for supervision and regulation has become much stronger over the recent years. And yet the supervisory role of the government, in the United States in particular, has been over the same period sharply curtailed, fed by an increasing belief in the self-regulatory nature of the market economy. This institutional vulnerability has implications not only for sharp practices, of which there were plenty, and some of them are being tried right now in the United States, but also for a tendency towards over-speculation that, as Adam Smith argued, tends to grip many human beings in their breathless search for profit. As was mentioned earlier, Smith called the promoters of excessive risk in search of ready profit prodigals and projectors, which is, by the way, quite a good description of the recent entrepreneurs of subprime mortgages and the so-called credit default swaps. The implicit, thank you. I must put it very far away. Thank you, okay. Thank you very much. The implicit faith in the wisdom of the standalone market, which is largely responsible for the removal of the established regulation in the United States, turned a blind eye towards the activities of prodigals and projectors. Adam Smith was concerned not only about the need for state regulation to restrain the market, but also about the necessity of state activities to supplement the market and do things that the market may not do on its own. Despite all that Adam Smith did to explicate the contribution to a well-functioning market, he was also deeply concerned about the incidence of poverty, illiteracy, quite common in his time, relative deprivation that might remain even with a well-functioning market economy. He wanted public services and not just markets, and he explained why having a plurality of institutions is important. There is a point of importance here, because Smith is often taken to be a person against intervention by the state. And there's a great passage, unfortunately I didn't quote it in this lecture, but in my introduction to Adam Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments I do quote, and this is actually from The Wealth of Nations really, where he says, intervention of the state in the interest of the working men are almost invariably just, but intervention in favor of the master tend to be the opposite. His complaint was that given the dominance of the government by the masters rather than the working men, the interventions basically were in favor of the masters. And therefore, what looked like generic antipathy towards intervention came from his theory of the state, as well as his analysis that it's the defenses of the market, of the masters of the market, masters of the industries, that tends to produce problems in intervention, not those which are sympathetic to the working men and the poor. That's a very important distinction to recognize. And it's amazing that that has lost sight in the thousands of books and articles that have been written about Smith. What we need above all today is a similarly probing understanding of the case for a genuinely dynamic multi-institution society. Either being rabidly against the market economy, as some people are, or on the other hand being dogmatically against the role of the state and public services, cannot take the place of a pragmatic appreciation of the different contributions that distinct institutions can make. The choice is between reasoned pragmatism and instinctive prejudice, and there is a very good case for returning to pragmatic social and economic analysis after decades of market worshipping prejudice. A well-functioning market economy can of course make a huge contribution to the growth of income and living standards. That is very important to recognize. Market is basically a very good thing in its creative role. And yet, in the absence of sensible regulation and necessary supplementation by supportive state activities, that market can be also deeply defective. What we have to work for now is to get an appropriate combination of activities of the market and of the state, and quite a lot of the engagement, both the informational and analytical engagement of public administrators, as well as the implementation and execution responsibilities of public administrators, have to look into this question quite deeply.